about Tai Chi fighting, we have to talk about push hands, because it's a crucial intermediate step in the development of the skills that you need in order to use Tai Chi as a fighting art. One thing that we see often is either people who have only studied Tai Chi in the form go into the ring and get beaten to a pulp. The other instance that we see are people who say they've trained Tai Chi, and they have, and they go into the ring and they basically start boxing or using any other skill that they have, but it's not Tai Chi. So there's always this gap where we never see actually proper Tai Chi fighting. And I think one of the problems is that we're not really doing push hands correctly, because push hands is where you develop those skills. And this is something that Yang Banhu, I believe, so one of Yang Michuan's sons, mentioned, is that the essence of Tai Chi is that you have to train two things simultaneously. You have to train the civil and the martial, so the internal and the external at the same time. And I think this is where we fail quite a bit, because you have to develop a training system where you're constantly going back and forth, reinforcing the internal and the external, the civil and the martial. And I think this is where push hands comes in, because it allows you to kind of slowly ramp up your skills without ever losing the internal aspects. So it's not like you don't suddenly get into like, oh, I'm gonna fight, right? Instead, you maintain the internal skills, and then you let, because this is internal art, so you let the insides come out. You let the internal skills be expressed externally. That's why it's important to do push hands correctly. And what I want to show is what I think would be a good pattern. So there is a whole set of exercises in the Michuan system, so the hidden tradition of the Yang style, of push hands, and they're all mostly dedicated to developing the mechanical skills, right? And what I'm going to talk about later is something different. So I just want to quickly go over those Michuan exercises, just so that we have a baseline. It's one of, and we see. Let's see, right, the first one is horizontal arm sweeps, and I'm not going to go through the whole things and explain everything because that'd take too long, but the horizontal arm swings, vertical arm swings, we have leaning back, leaning forward, and turning the shoulder, right? So notice that they all require that sitting on the rear leg, right? So that rear-legged stance. So again, it's sitting on that rear leg, horizontal arm swings, vertical arm swings, leaning back, leaning forward or folding forward, and then turning the shoulder. All right, and it's basically a way of developing balance on one leg so that I can be here, and essentially I can move 360 degrees on that one leg while balanced on one leg, right? So that's one of the ways of developing the Tai Chi practice, or the push hands practice. In the Michuan system, then you would do it as a two-person exercise, which means you're sitting here and somebody pushes on your shoulder, so you do horizontal arm swings. Somebody pushes on the other shoulder, you do vertical arm swings. Somebody pushes your chest, leaning back. Somebody pushes your belly, lean forward. Somebody pushes your shoulder, and you roll. Then the next set would be to hold your arm up in ward off, and then your partner pushes against the forearm, and then basically do the same thing. So you sit, right, or you sit, roll back, sit up, sit down, and roll, right? So that's the sequence of Michuan push hands exercises. Just wanted to acknowledge that they exist, because it's not what I'm going to be talking about. One thing that we will be seeing over and over again, though, is that reliance on the rear leg. So when we're standing, I'm not sitting on the front leg, I'm sitting on the rear leg. The front leg is there, but it's fairly loose. It's there to brace me, right? So I'm going to move and push, but I'm not sitting on the front leg, mostly so that we're not breaking the connection between the rear leg and the pushing hand, right? Because it's something I've talked about in other videos. I'm pushing off that rear leg, pushing with the opposite hand. So left leg, right arm, diagonal across the body, and pushing. All of that is going to continue to be applied to the push hands. That front leg, we want to learn to be, right, judicious about its use, meaning it's going to be here. It holds me back when I push, right? So I'm actually pushing backwards that way. But I want to be comfortable sitting down, absorbing pushes, and that front foot being free. We're going to see that later on. That's very important in how we step and how we use our legs in push hands. So just want to lay all that down because I'm going to be talking about ways of doing push hands to develop the skills that you need to finally get into sparring while maintaining Tai Chi principles, essentially. All right, so let's start.